I don't think that the what they call the Westminster divines, these are the people who originally wrote these things. I don't think they were intending to contradict themselves. Obviously, nobody sets out to contradict themselves.
So to get started, we obviously need to define our terms. What does it mean for God to be the author of sin? A lot of people throw the term out there without defining it, and so it has a tendency to spark different things in people's minds. The phrase is notably found in the Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 3, which says that God from all eternity did, by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass. Yet so thereby neither is God the author of sin, nor is violence offered to the will of creatures, nor is liberty or contingency of second causes taken away, but rather established. My claim that different people assume different things into the phrase author of sin is proven by the fact that I've heard many try to suggest that what the Westminster Confession says here is a contradiction. How can it say that God ordains whatsoever comes to pass, which would include evil, and then immediately say that God is not the author of evil? This must be a contradiction. Well, this is just a case of imposing a particular definition of a phrase onto a document that is not using the phrase in that way to begin with. Well over 100 people were involved in the writing of the Westminster Confession, and I think we need to give them a little more credit than to say that they are directly contradicting themselves within 2 sentences. The Confession makes it clear that at the time of its writing, the phrase author of sin had a particular meaning and usage focused mainly on the idea that God would be forcing people to sin, as it immediately says, violence is not offered to the will of creatures, nor is liberty or contingency of second causes taken away. This is simply saying that God does not force people to sin, nor is he manifest in creation directly causing people to sin. When you ask, is God the author of sin, it just depends what you mean. It's really that simple. If you mean God has planned and purposed and determined the occurrence of sin, then the answer is yes, God is the author of sin. If you mean, does God force people to sin, then obviously the answer is no, just as the Westminster Confession itself denies. Now, I think that these days the whole God forces people to sin argument has been beaten to death, and rightly so. It's probably the worst argument that could ever be raised against the Calvinist. So I think that inherent in the plain meaning of the words and phrase author of sin is the idea of purpose, planning, intention, and authority. We know that the authors of books have the authority to write their story however they see fit, all of it from start to finish. And some of their story might certainly include bad or evil things. But we recognize that if those things are a part of the story, they are there for a purpose. Is the author of such a story the author of only the good things in the story? Or is he the author of all the things in that story, including the bad? Obviously, he's the author of all of it. I actually have no problem affirming that God is the author of sin. And by that I mean that God has planned, purposed, and determined whatsoever comes to pass, that God brings to pass by his ultimate power all things, including sin.